The big problem that a reading teacher has, for the most part, in helping a struggling reader is they no longer experience the struggle of reading the way the reader is. They have a mental model of what it's like, but they no longer feel it. It's no longer in their bones. It's no longer on the edge of their experience. So they have an idea of what must be going wrong, but they don't have an experience of it. So what you want to do, if you want to really be an effective reading teacher, at least in the one-on-one sense of trying to get back into contact with somebody who's struggling, is get on that edge with them, right? And the problem with that is, once you see the letter, I have one guy that does a great experiment with this. Once you see the letters, you experience the word without any delay. But that's exactly what's not happening for them. And one of the reasons it's not happening for them, of course, is that little kids grow up exposed to letters initially as if they have definitive sound values. That's an A, that's a B, that's a C, right? And that fundamentally misorients their initial mental response to seeing that letter. Because if they have that response when they see that letter in the context of reading, it'll misdirect them, right? So one of the first things to do if you want to try to help them through the confusion and to bring your attention to where they're confused is to actually start to play with the kinds of confusions the kids are experiencing, and so that you learn about the kind of confusions the kids are experiencing. So one example of this is letter names. I know this is completely disconnected from the way that we normally teach reading, but again, it's about teaching teachers how to get into deeper sync with readers who are struggling. So one example is to help kids understand when does a letter sound like its name and when does it not? Because that's their first confusion. That's their first reactive, misorienting response to a letter is that its letter name is it's not. So simply by tapping on a letter as they move their eyes across and you're tracking with them as they're reading, as they come across the letter and you see a hesitation, you feel the hesitation in their mind as they're dealing with that, tap on it if it's a letter name. Knocks out the confusion immediately once you've cued them to that. So the metaphor here is orchestrate, what I call orchestrated reading. So imagine that what you're doing is playing the role of an orchestra conductor, and it's their mind that you're conducting. And you're using the pencil tip right on the edge of the letters as they're reading. Right as their mind's scanning across it, right as they're trying to speak, as they're trying to put the words together. And as they come across, every time they start to bog down, your attention's right on the edge with where it is their mind is processing that code and starting to bog. Now there's a series of ways that their minds go into the bogs. One is, like I said, letter name confusion. So you can help them with that if you develop just this one simple signal. In fact, there's a small number of signals that once you learn how to use them, you can actually kind of conduct them off into high-speed reading. This is one. Another one is a silent. Next thing is when does the letter not make any noise, not make any sound? Again, these are very confusing. When little kids are in cribs, there's no letter that doesn't make a sound. They all make sounds. So when they encounter them in words, which ones make sounds? Another problem that they encounter is what I call the difference between a discrete letter sound and a spectrum letter sound. Discrete, like C and K, they don't sound nothing like each other, right? They're different. They're like different altogether. Whereas other letters, like the different spectrum of A, there's a connectum. They're part of a spectrum, right? So if it's discrete, you kick it down or up to suggest which of its variants sound it's making. If it's a spectrum sound, where it's a matter of how short or long or drawn out the sound is, you stretch it out. By the way, this is available on the website for those that work first person with children. Again, I'm sharing this in this kind of rapid way as we come to close, because this is a metaphor for thinking about syncing up with learners. Because again, either you are working as a teacher to get on the edge of their mind in the real-time differentiation of what's going on in them, and able to recognize when they're going into the stutter and dropping out, and because you can recognize that, are meeting them with ways that can help them continue, or you're at a distance from them, throwing a model at them and hoping that when it all comes out, it'll all come out in the wash probabilistically that they pass whatever your test is. And if you're really interested in getting on the edge, what you need is in kind of exercise environments that will help you learn your way into meeting them on the edge, and that's what this is an example of. So there's this letter sound spectrum. Combined letters. Again, we talked briefly about that. The letters were combined by a handful of clerks in the 15th century to make up for missing letters. There's nothing sacred about them. They're an accident. And yet that's another problem. Kids don't, there's no letters joined together in the mobile, right? So how do kids know when they first see a letter whether it's supposed to have an independent sound or it's supposed to have a sound together? By meeting them on the edge when you can feel them. Again, I have kids read, and if you learn to listen, and you know about these code confusions, you know about the kind of confusions they're prone to, which is entirely different than the way adults analytically look back on this, right? All of the reading scientists are based, and I have some great conversations with them, is based on being on the other side of the problem and looking back on it with computer pattern analysis and all kinds of adult logic and post-reading skill capabilities, thinking about reading from that perspective. But that's not the perspective of the child that's struggling to learn their way into it. They have an entirely different set of confusions. And if you can read what those confusions are, recognize them when they're happening, you can cue them right through it. I've taught kids to get through this that were sitting in the back of the bus, that just by listening to them, I could tell them that's a high, that's a low, that's an alternate, and they could just keep flying when they'd hit the bog. But you got to be able to meet them in the bog. You got to be able to meet them on the edge. The same thing is true with segmentation. So I won't go further into this. We'll come back to this. There's this piece and other pieces of material that I've shared are available on the website. And anybody who emails me and asks for them, I'll be happy to send them to them. It's not a way to teach. It's a way to learn about what's going on inside a learner who's struggling.